Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, and horror. Taking a brief break from our exploration of the Land of the Mists, today we will cover a new version of the domain of Rishmulo and the Dark Lord Jacqueline Ronier, featured in the Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft, and provide some comments on the changes introduced for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Are you ready? So let us explore this new version of Rishmulo and find out what new horrors are unveiled by the Mists in the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Hour of the Raven. The new Rishmulo is a Ravenloft domain that explores themes of disaster horror and gothic horror. The realm remains largely uninhabited and is secretly dominated by were-rats, but it shifts its focus away from plots of intrigue to encompass the horrors of a lethal and cyclical plague. The domain is set in the chivalric era, and its main horror inspiration is the tragic Black Death that ravaged the world in the 14th century and for many years to come. The horror of a plague transmitted by rats is here linked to the theme of lycanthropy, through the were-rats, and also to more modern themes such as the use of biological weapons. The topics of a plague and isolation may also resonate with the current ongoing pandemic. The setting of a lethal plague spread by rodents that are controlled by an evil force reminded me a lot of 1979 movie Nosferatu the Vampire, in which the plague of Black Death is attributed and connected to the actions of Count Dracula, who sent swarms of rats to spread the disease, and portrays the tragedies of the population dealing with a devastating plague. In the classic setting of Ravenloft, Rishmulo played an important diplomatic role at the core, and stood out as a land of opportunity, welcoming foreigners from all over the Land of the Mists. The domain was rife with intrigue and secrets, harboring secret societies and conspiracies that could easily spill over into larger plots that reached different domains. With Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft's new proposal to isolate the domains in the Mists, this cauldron of intrigue is put aside, and the themes had to be readapted to a scenario that has a more centered theme and proposal, now focused on the disease and isolation. The domain is now constantly devastated by a cyclical plague, and lives between hope and despair. The gnawing plague, or simply the gnawls, can be lethal, and its contamination is caused by bites by rats or were-rats. The victims experience fever, sweats, fatigue, rashes, bulbs and tremors, which make their faces twitch like rats sniffing or gnawing food. The plague reaches its peak cyclically. At times, everything seems to be returning to normal, and people hope that everything can be right again. But a new cycle of the plague is never too far away. When signs of the coming plague begin, the population locks themselves in their homes. The gates of the great manors and cities are locked, and the empty streets are taken over by rats that emerge from the sewers. Cities are quarantined, and no medical help or treatment reach the sick. As a good backdrop for the devastation of the plague, the horrors of the disease can serve to amplify themes in which human conflicts can flourish. In a city deserted by the plague, clusters of family may compete for resources, or must venture into streets taken by dangerous swarms of rats, in search of a way to cure and save their loved ones. Rishmulo's rules still falls to Jacqueline Ronier, who takes up her position as an aristocratic regent after the death of the royal family. The new map of the domain bears a lot of similarities to the map of the older setting. All cities that previously figured in the realm are also portrayed in Rishmulo's new domain, but they undergo some changes. The capital of Rishmulo remains Pont-à-Mousson, which has not undergone much change in its basic description. This gigantic city still has buildings that could house a much larger population than the one that currently occupies it, and half of its buildings are empty. Its current inhabitants are not the original residents, and its extravagant and decadent architecture reveals a more cosmopolitan and luxurious past. In the capital, Jacqueline continues to rule from her mansion, the Château de la Nuit, which now sits above an underground complex, the Inverted Court, from where she directs the alchemist were-rats to develop new variants of the gnawing plague. The city of St. Ronges was, in the classic setting, known for being home to a population devoted to the Church of Ezra, and was gripped by the violence of criminal gangs due to the constant struggle of rival warrants of were-rats for power. The city was also home to the cult of Simon, a group of humans from the Ronnier family who worshipped an ancient dead and opposed Jacqueline Ronnier. In the new version of St. Ronges, from the Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft, the city dared to rebel against Jacqueline Ronnier's rule, and now pays the price for their audacity. They challenged Jacqueline Ronnier's legitimacy as a regent, and she granted St. Ronges its independence. Since then, the city has been attacked by the plague more brutally than the rest of Richemouleau, and has not received any support from the government. After the constant devastation by the plague, the population of St. Ronges has already recognized Jacqueline's government and begged her to accept them again as part of Richemouleau, but she has not yet given a final position to the city, that continues to wither and suffer. The city of Mortigny was also drastically altered. In the classic setting, Mortigny was the city that, in the past, defended republican ideals of independence and was harshly punished by the Ronniers. Now, it was a thriving commercial center whose aristocracy rivaled the court of Pont-à-Mousson in intrigue, extravagance, and scandals. The new Mortigny is a small but overpopulated town with crowded streets and buildings. This is always the first city to be quarantined during the plague outbreak, and because it is home to a large number of doctors and healers, it has become a center where infected people are sent to get treatment or die far from their homes. A central figure in Mortigny is the physician Simone Temator, who runs a clinic in the city. Many doctors try to find a cure for the disease, but in the face of failure, some have resorted to unconventional or unethical practices for their research and treatment. The new map of Richemouleau presents other locations with intriguing names, such as the Phantom Lakes, the Assassin's Echoes, the Gargoyle, the Piper Woods, the House of Flies, and the Perfumer's Pool, but no further information is passed about these locations, which need to be developed by narrators or by future supplements. Some of these locations, such as the Alder Ruins, are a reference and nod to the classic setting. In the classic Ravenloft, Simon Alder was a human and Jacqueline Ronnier's father, but was murdered by her mother, and then returned from his grave thanks to a group of cultists who opposed the were-rats of the Ronnier clan. There wasn't an Alder Ruins in the classic setting, but this map reference reveals that at least the character was remembered by the developers in the 5th edition setting, who decided to include this mysterious location in the map. The Piper's Woods also remind us of the short story Nocturne from the book Tales of Ravenloft, in which Jacqueline Ronnier confronts the legendary Piper of Hamelin, who arrives in Richemouleau and tries to enchant and exterminate the rats of St. Ronges. Narrators could use this reference to create in this location the refuge of this Piper with the mystical gift of enchanting rats with his music, to become a force in opposition to Jacqueline Ronnier and her were-rats. Finally, the Perfumer's Pool, located beside the House of Flies to the north, while not directly related to nothing in Richemouleau's classic setting, remind me of Patrick Suskind's novel, The Perfume, set in the 18th century France, in which a man with an extraordinary sense of smell becomes a perfumer and a serial killer. The Dark Lord of the new Richemouleau is still Jacqueline Ronier, but the character is reimagined. The Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft does not provide stats for the Dark Lords, but states that Jacqueline Ronier has the same stats as a were-rat. She can telepathically command all the rats that are in her vicinity, and sometimes command these rodents to occupy empty armors, forming a personal guard known as Les Casques Silencieux, or the Silent Helms. The new version of Jacqueline is obsessed with the power and privilege that comes from her social position of nobility, and believes she is infallible in her rule over Richemouleau. In her view, there is no one better to rule these lands, and everyone must bow to her authority and acknowledge her superiority. Those who dare to challenge her position will be victims of severe punishment and consequences, as a lesson to others. Although she never admits this fact, she knows that her position is due only through the privileges and riches inherited with her title of nobility, and she will take whatever steps are necessary to keep the commoners under control, far from threatening her position of privilege. The monstrous Dark Lord is willing to let Richemouleau rot in death and destruction before ceding any part of her power, wealth, and privileges. The nature of the torments sent by the Dark Powers to torture Jacqueline Ronier has also been altered. Although she needs to govern to maintain her privileges and vanity, she hates to rule, and her decrees are often harsh and only take her interests into account. Her own crimes had made Richemouleau a shadow of what it once was, and she misses the refinement, luxury, and decadence of what these lands once were. She also knows that her position as a ruler is fragile, and that conspiracies are always springing up to remove her from power. For this reason, she is always active in the development and spread of the plague, to suppress the insurgent population and justify her arbitrary acts. The new version of the character contrasts with the personality of the classic version of Jacqueline Ronier, and abandons the flaws and insecurities that made the were-rat one of the most human among the Dark Lords. Previously, Jacqueline's torment was more intimate, and she always assumed her monstrous form in front of someone she truly loved. She was tormented by her fear of loneliness and by the rejection of the one she loved. Jacqueline's classic version was equally cruel and monstrous in her deeds, and would defend her position of power by any means, but her methods were described more as those of a schemer and blackmailer, while the current version is given to more evident and public demonstrations of her power. The past of the new version of Jacqueline Ronier is briefly explored in the new book, and it also undergoes major changes. In this new take, the Roniers were an important noble family from the prosperous realm of Richemouleau. This prosperity was taking the bourgeois and merchants to a new level of wealth and power, and the pure-blood nobility, like the Roniers, would soon be threatened in their social position and political power. Jacqueline realized that if they did nothing, soon the nobility would be nothing but landowners, while the real power and wealth would be in the hands of the merchants. She then tried to convince her family to act to secure their position of power, but none of them saw the threat of these social and political changes, or were willing to take the necessary steps to retain their power. She searched for allies and conspirators to aid in her cause, until she found a secret society, the Council of the Purebloods. She sought a way to join and be accepted among this powerful secret cabal, and was finally accepted in their midst. To her surprise, however, this band was not composed of the nobility, but of filthy were-rats, who capture and contaminate her with lycanthropy. Jacqueline Ronier's vanity and arrogance soon led her to view were-rats as a superior race. She infected the entire Ronier family with lycanthropy, except for her twin sister Louise, who refused the transformation and was then disfigured and banished from the family. The Roniers now led the were-rats, and under their command, the alchemist were-rats developed the Gnawing Plague. This plague devastated Richmulo, undiscriminating killing the commoners and the nobility. The death of the aristocracy opened new spaces of power, and Jacqueline quickly occupied this space and opportunities. When the royal family died of the plague, she assumed the position of temporary regent, which she never abandoned. The population begged for help and aid, but Jacqueline never cared about commoners and was repulsed by their poverty. The plague ran its course and decimated the entire population of Richmulo. When Richmulo's last human life was claimed by the plague, leaving only rats and were-rats, the mist arose to engulf the realm into the demiplane of dread. In the nightmare reality that formed, the realm was once more inhabited, though its cities were sparsely populated and largely empty. Jacqueline now rules over the shadow of what once was a lavish and lush realm, and finds her position as regent constantly threatened by conspiracies and popular insurgencies. Her control over the Gnawing Pest is her main weapon. Whenever her power is under threat, she unleashes a new variant of the plague, imposing quarantine, isolation, and martial law on the cities, and letting death reap the life of her detractors. Richmulo's new proposal still has the were-rats as a secret threat, but leaves aside more open and subtle plots of intrigue in favor of a horror that addresses themes such as the disease and isolation, under the prism of social struggle, like France just before the French Revolution. Now, the domain is always on the brink of disaster, altering between moments of tranquility and destruction by a new cycle of the Gnawing Plague. The change of focus and themes becomes necessary when the domains become isolated by the mists, and the inhabitants of the domain cannot escape the constant cycles of death caused by the plague. Many still prefer to cling to the old version of Richmulo, or try to integrate elements from both versions, with the proposal to maintain the classic setting and integrate the elements proposed in the new book. The disease that plagues Richmulo could be the result of a variation of the Becoming Plague, a plague that was being developed by the Filth Breeders were-rats under the command of Jacqueline Ronier. Perhaps the disease that was being developed to allow common rats to transmit lycanthropy had an adverse effect, and instead created a potent plague that is decimating Richmulo. Maybe the plague kills most of those who become infected, but those who survive the course of the disease become grotesque were-rats. This plague may be a grand plot and event to devastate the core, just as the Black Death ravaged the world in the past, placing Jacqueline Ronier at the center of a great plot that would affect the entire demiplane of dread. With death rapidly spreading through the population, several Dark Lords may be forced to close the borders of their domains to control the advance of the plague, or even isolate cities and neighborhoods that are the focus of the contamination. This circumstance would make it possible to explore the theme of the isolation and horror of a plague without necessarily breaking down the core and isolating its domains in the mists. We will be curious to see how each Dark Lord will deal with this threat, protecting their domains from a deadly plague that can also spread lycanthropy. Another possible alternative to isolate these lands would be that Jacqueline Ronier, from the classic setting, had crossed the borders of Richemoulo during the spread of the plague after finally discovering the whereabouts of Henry Dubois, her beloved that once rejected her. Like Count Strahd in the adventure Curse of Strahd, the Grande Dame of Richemoulo could be searching for a way to find her love obsession and doom Richemoulo to a terrible plague. The background presented by the Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft, revealing conflicts with the aristocracy and constant conspiracies to remove the ruler Jacqueline Ronier from power, can also be used to develop plots of intrigue in this domain. What will happen in the prosperous domain of Richemoulo if the merchants and bourgeois began to threaten the ruling aristocracy, and threaten the rule of Jacqueline and the supremacy of the Roniers? One of the answers to the mysterious past of Richemoulo can also adapt part of the history of the realm as presented in the Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft. Its empty cities and ruins could easily have been ravaged in the past by a deadly plague, and its new occupants lie on the ruins of a civilization exterminated by disease. Perhaps vestiges of the past and the plague could be found hidden underground in its ruins, and the disease might finally find its way back to the surface. Perhaps the mysterious entity known as the Withered Rat, or some other evil and supernatural entity, might be the cause of this plague that destroyed the kingdom in the past. And you, what did you think of this new version of Richemoulo in the Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft? Which elements from these versions do you plan to use in your games? Join us, subscribe to this channel, and activate notifications, and in the next video we will resume our journey through the mists. As we head to Mordant, we will delve into Auric Nuikin's studies of lycanthropy to better understand our cursed condition.